That's a great question because,
But huge.
yeah, it is a huge one. From Life University's perspective, because we look at our global initiatives driven primarily from sustainability. And when we look at the UN and how the UN is trying to organize a global expression of their goals and objectives for the world, there is the duplicity that they speak in the ideal. They have taken what they see as the world's problems and condensed them into 17 sustainable goals that they want to create. And yet, in many ways, they ignore the reality of the true governmental tensions that are in the area. And so, in conversations and meetings and conferences like this one with the ECPD, you see the theory works very, very well, but the practical application of it is incredibly difficult and actually seems to be, as the chairman said in his opening comments, this is a think tank. We need more do tanks. We need to be able to identify real and legitimate grassroots organizations that have the vision that's global, the compassion that starts locally and then can grow through the area, because we can speak about cooperative programs, and yet in the same breath, faculty from Serbia may have a difficult time even going as a faculty member to Kosovo or to Croatia to speak because of gender or background or belief or whatever. And so when we're speaking on this global plan that's going to, amazingly, the UN says by 2030, they're going to eliminate poverty. Everyone's going to be educated. It's great to have those objectives, but I think the hard reality is if you can't get to the individual people and solve the cultural and generational divides that have come down sometimes through history, through hundreds of years of tradition, then I think really these exercises that we have are really conjecture. It really is think tanks of people sitting around a table saying, wouldn't it be great if this could happen? And I think for our perspective, the key is the youth of the world. Because if we cannot change their perspective of how the world is supposed to work, they simply inherit their parents' beliefs or their cultural beliefs of their region. And because most of those are divided through nationalism, through religious or cultural barriers, it's really going to be impossible, I think, to see the true UN goals achieved. I think they're wonderful. I think they're honorable. I think if no one tries, we know that nothing will ever happen on the positive. But for me, I think the serious reality is we have to figure out a way in the process of education for all, which is the social determinant number 4. What is that education? Is it simply the education of the academics of school? Or is it really the education about how do we respect the cultural differences of each other through an approach of compassion and integrity and ethics versus learning the history of my country and therefore what my country's position is in the world, and therefore that's how I'm going to act because that's how I've been trained. So it's a complicated process, but I think at the fundamental anchoring is truly through education. And then the challenge is, how do we find the right people to educate the youth, which are the future leaders for us, finding the right tools, meaning the right educators, within the UN model of education is very, very difficult, because human nature usually has a primary objective and then a secondary objective. And so when you get into education, one of the speakers yesterday talked about history. And history throughout all civilizations is actually a perspective of the writer of that. There's no absolute history, because there's no truly objective person that can look and go, I'm just recording the facts. They record the facts based on their perspective. And the same in education. And this is where it becomes so difficult, because if the true agenda is world peace and compassion for humankind, then those educators, I'll say it's education without borders, which means we have to be able to address the culture of a Muslim nation, where women have a totally different relationship within that culture and that position and value. And yet, recognizing that culture has the right to believe that, and yet from a global compassion and application for women, it's inappropriate. There's an imbalance there of how do you balance the cultural norms of value and the global norms of value that would really have to exist for world peace. And so to find those educators, I think, is also another one of those ideal theories that unless we have people who come along, I won't say Nelson Mandela was a perfect man. I won't say Martin Luther King was a perfect man. They had their own issues. But what I so admired about Mandela is when he finally had the position of power, he didn't use the power. He used the position to live out what he truly believed, which was that a country that divides itself through racial profiling or gender profiling or anything like that is not as great a country as one that can bring everyone to a peer level of value. And I think one of the other things for me is, so often what is discussed in our meetings and in the UN is redistribution of wealth, that the issues in this world are money. And I don't believe that's true. I believe it's education, because without the education, no matter how much money you provide to someone, they won't know what to do with it. And if all they do is reinforce their own cultural beliefs, then we continue to have these cultural divides, which say, if you look this way, or if you believe this way, or if you were born female versus male, we have already established your position in life. And don't ever consider rising above that position, because our culture, our portion of the world, our borders won't allow you to do that. Until the UN can solve that, which is a problem of their own membership, the theories are just theories. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I think it's always easier to talk about what we could do than actually do what we should do. And I think the ECPD has a very unique position because they are a university that was created by the UN. So this is actually the United Nations extension of what they think an educational pathway should be. Centers for peace and development, to look at the whole process of compassion, to look at all those things. And so I think the framework is a good start. The challenge will be to find the proper educators that will work within the ECPD system to reinforce a common goal regardless of their topic, whether it's economics, or whether it's law, or whether it's health education, or whatever it is, that you have that knowledge base, but that knowledge base is anchored in a consistent goal of the reason we're teaching this is in perspective to a global world peace mentality that requires that you take this education and you integrate it into a compassionate base of tolerance, of understanding, of reconciliation, of finding ways to resolve generational centuries of divide that have come either geographically, religiously, government power, whatever. And I think if even just a few dozen of those people could be identified around the world as young people, within their generation, they could reshape the educational format. And I think with the ECPD, because they have so many different locations that can be actualized, now they have to have the people that actually can do the actualization for not our generation, not my generation, not your generation, but the youth. Because I believe if we can't change people's thinking before they're 5 or 6 years old, all we do is reinforce what their parents or their society has put into them, either through support or conflict, and that's the rest of their life.